Yo, Pablo, thanks so much for taking out the time today to chat with us. I really appreciate it. We were kind of wrapping before we jumped on here, but before we get into the nitty gritty of what you're doing today, can you tell everybody about, kind of your past, how you got into, business and everything else?
Whew, man, I'm going to try to keep this really short, Peter. First of all,
Okay.
I really appreciate you having me, man. Like, I'm somebody that greatly values a stage, and you sharing it with me means a lot. So, thanks for having me. Pumped to be here. And
Of course.
I'm somebody that's been obsessed with relationships my whole life. I was born in South America, and then we moved to Europe for a while, and then I moved to the U.S. And like all my formative memories are showing up somewhere, not knowing anybody, and needing to figure out how to belong, and that kind of shaped me throughout my whole life. And as I grew older, I realized that being a entertaining person will only take me to a certain level of like influence and friendships beyond my 30s, right? The Ace Ventura shtick is only going to last for so long.
Yeah.
So I had to figure out how to add value.
Yeah.
And I've been iterating on this idea of how do I add the most value to people I can throughout, by leaning into what is my superpower and how do I use that to serve kind of thing. And it happens to be that I see something special. I fall in love with everybody I meet because I see something special in them, and I'm a great communicator. So I'm like a world-class hype man, right? Like I'm about to fall in love with you and tell everybody how great you are, right? So the marketing agency around the methodology that I call a relationship flywheel, that basically how you produce shows and promote them and promote others on your stage to be guilty by association with you. And then repurpose the content, use it strategically around your go-to-market functions. And doing that brought me to this company, JWB Real Estate Capital, which was my first like big client. And we built this like community and this show around passive investing, people that want to get out of the rat race and grow their passive income. And getting involved with them has completely changed the trajectory of my life, including just getting really deep into real estate. Like I've gone like deep into investing in rental properties over the last 2 years. I've acquired 3 totally passive, just kind of funneling any kind of active income I can get from my active activities and putting it into that, because I've really grown to understand this idea that you can build this passive long-term wealth through this very, very unique vehicle of workforce housing that are completely managed by somebody else, and really understanding how these like 5 profit centers all come together. And then that's made me really niche into like the investor space, because now I'm like addicted to financial education. And the more and more I network around that, like that's where I'm at, man.
So, dude, it's a rabbit hole. It's a rabbit hole that you can continue, to go down.
Yeah.
And I mean, for a lot of people, I think that taken away from your story, for one, diversity, being able to kind of go into any situation and also, any area geographically and really build relationships is, for one, a value and a trait that not everybody is able to build. And that's huge for you, because sometimes, most people you talk to, especially in America, before we get into business, like you go to one school, and then from that school, you go to the next one. So you go to like elementary school, middle school, and high school, and you go with pretty much the same crew throughout, each step of growing up. And that's, a good percentage of people. And I think I was listening to ESPN. This was a long time ago, maybe 6-7 years ago. And they were saying, I forget who I was listening to, but he said, I think like 65 or 67% of people stay in the same place from where they grew up. And like, there's no change, right? And I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm more so saying you took that as a leverage to get to the next level and be able to, utilize those skills and build upon those skills, the skills you don't even know about, and do that throughout life.
Listen, I appreciate you acknowledging that. I very much attribute my success in life to the fact that I see everything as an outsider trying to get to the inside, right? So like, I really believe that fundamentally communication is about the receptor of the message much more than the deliverer, right? Like there's this quote that is, you never start a conversation with anybody. All you can do is hope to catch up to a conversation happening in their head. And the more that you can think from the outside in, the better that you're going to do, because you're going to activate into that space of aligning goals with people and understanding what brings them value. And once you show up that way and you start leaning into that, man, things just really, really open up. And I felt really fortunate to, have learned that at a young age. And then I learned this idea of thinking like an outsider at a young age. And then in my early 30s, when I got really involved with a nonprofit, I kind of started using it for good, right? Like at first, as a kid, I was using it for self-interest. It's like, oh, yeah, an 8-year-old that can make friends with adults gets all the candy, son. You know what I mean? Like in the true story. Yeah. As I aged, I realized the people that are the most influential people in my town are people on the boards of charities, and they all got there by serving. And human beings are happiest when they're in service. Yeah. So if you can take that thing that you're really, really great at and put it into service, now you got a recipe for fulfillment. Like I was telling you before the call, right? Like I feel like I've been on full sprint for the last 9 months, and I'm not tired because I'm serving, right? Like it's like it's filling my bucket all the time, man. So yeah, to the original point, think like an outsider, man. Like put yourself in, think from that perspective was a something that, hit me at an early age that I'm very, very fortunate to feel.
So talk to me about, filling like your bucket. So you mentioned that, and especially in business and in life, like, you've experienced things that draw you down versus stuff that builds you up. How has that changed, over the course of your life, and then also helped you in, progression towards real estate and everything else, like doing something that actually is giving you passion versus taking that passion away?
Dude, that's such a great question. I grew up I'm like the most American person in my family, right? And I grew up in that like immigrant mentality of just like, no, you're going to be like your dad, and this is the path. And, my dad was an entrepreneur, and yet somehow I was being groomed to be like an executive, right? And I'm like, it didn't make a lot of sense, right? But I think I was, frankly speaking, talented enough to fake it into stuff that I really wasn't that passionate about, to then make people think that I could belong there enough, right? Like I had that in me. But in the middle of my career, right? Like I started my first company in 2009. I started a green building consulting company, got acquired by my biggest client, and I went in-house as director of sustainability for a hospital developer. And at the same time, I got really involved in charities, right? Like I had moved back to Miami from Southern California, and I got this email for Habitat for Humanity that they wanted to start a young professionals group. And I just raised my hand. I thought it would be good business development for me. Short term, spoiler alert, it wasn't, but it completely changed the trajectory of my life, because a year later I was on the board of Habitat, and then I was doing these leadership programs, and I used that formula to build other young professional programs to get on other boards. And at a certain point in my life, I realized that the specialty in a skill set only marginalized me, while the ability to diversify my influence and diversify my access to people was, just like in investing, the way to hedge against risk. Yeah. Right. So once I figured that out, once I put together this idea of like, use your superpower to serve, and networking is diversification, I've really just leaned into that nonstop. And that took me from like a very unfulfilling career in construction, where I immediately became a business developer. After that, I wouldn't shut up about this idea of like value aggregated business development. That got me to be the VP of corporate strategy and business development for like a startup up in Jacksonville, proved kind of my thesis in 1 year in Jacksonville. Then I took a 90-day purposeful pause in early 2019 to figure out where I want to be in 10 years, and reverse engineer, came up with this like language of community creation for business development. And the more and more that I have let go of the bag of like, why am I not somebody that like dots the I's and crosses the T's, as opposed to this idea of like, my superpower is that I can make friends with anybody. And if I can make friends with anybody, I can make them friends with anybody else. And just really dove into that. Things have taken off for me, right? Like the waste starts to melt away when you get singularly focused on your superpower. And I listened to this podcast called The Growth Now Movement with Justin Schenck, and he's got this question of like, what's your definition of success, that I've asked myself a lot. And now I've actually been on that show, which is really cool. But I really think that there's like these like 4 steps to like really finding fulfillment and success. And the first one is figuring out that superpower, right? What is the thing that you are really great at that you love to do? And early on, I'm just like, I remember watching an interview from Zach Galifianakis, and he was just like, all I've ever cared about is being funny, man. And that's why I'm here. And I'm like, great, dude. Well, I can't be a comedian. You know, like I just like making friends. And it just pissed me off. But then I'm like, you know what? I can reverse engineer this, right? So like I honed in on that piece through the nonprofit stuff, through the business development stuff. Then I realized that the next step to that is figure out a way to turn that into service, right? Like, so it's like, this is my superpower. How do I use it to help others? I immediately went from trying to be the coolest guy in the room to try to make you feel like the coolest guy in the room, whoever's in front of me. Yeah. And then once that took me, you know, next echelon, then I got this like vision for value aggregated business development. And that's when I started figuring out, how do you take that service and you monetize it in an authentic way? And that took me a while, right? Like the initial thing is like, well, charge for introductions. Not authentic, right? Yeah. Like then it's like, oh, host masterminds. I was like, not really where I want to be, until I realized that I could start this like kind of like mixture strategy, PR, marketing agency thing. I realized that I could monetize that thing. And then once you realize how to monetize it, then it's all about scaling around that, right? And that's where I find myself today. I have built a business around the thing that I love to do, that I'm great at, being the thing that drives the business. And I just can't, you know, anything else, I'd rather go get a job, right? Because it's hard to be an entrepreneur. Yeah. But if what I'm doing is focusing on this thing, I'm willing to get punched in the teeth whenever, because it's so fulfilling.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you said a lot of good things in there, especially, you know, I kind of thought about this when you talked about, you know, making you feel you know, like if I'm talking to you at a networking event or something like that, being, you know, the center of attention and stuff like that. I've talked to a couple of people recently, like the past like year and a half, and they're like, you know, we'll go somewhere and they're like, oh, you know, I feel like, you know, they're never asking about me. And I say, you know, I talk to them and I'm like, because they're always like, how do you network? How do you do this and stuff like that? Where, it's okay. Well, you want to add value to the person that you're talking to, right? So you and I, before we jumped on the call, we were chatting a little bit about, you know, certain things that you're passionate about outside of work, you know, and it wasn't a, hey, I just, you know, want to get you on the podcast or want to, you know, build a relationship so you can buy from me. It's more so what I felt like over the years is having conversations, true, meaningful conversations, asking more questions than, you know, trying to get more questions asked about me. It goes farther, because then all of a sudden I know about Pablo. I know about, you know, you like an outcast, all those other things that, you know, brings, you know, value to that person, where they want to open up more and they want to, you know, be willing to be vulnerable. And I think that kind of going back to what you spoke about is, you know, you figuring out your superpower, feeling out how you were able to add value to people, to open up doors that you've never been able to open up, and not saying, hey, you know, Zach Galifianakis, you know, he just wants people to be funny, right? And then like you didn't have the traits that he has, but you have other traits to open doors and stuff like that. So I bring that full circle, because I think that, you know, not only does that fulfill people, but it also puts, you know, people into a better, you know, bracket when you're talking about business and everything else. Yeah. Not to say, hey, I got to do this to get X amount more money, because you can't have that underlying thing when you go talk to someone. It's more so let's build a conversation, let's build a relationship, and then we can go from there. Versus the other way around is people go, you know, hopefully, you know, he can either get on my podcast, get me $100,000, or, you know, invest in this deal with me. And that's not how you should, like you said a little while ago, reverse engineer kind of what you're looking for and then go from there.
Yeah. What's in it for you, man? Like what's in it for you is the thing that matters to me the most. And that's why I love the fact that you're a podcaster, right? Like I think that this is the ultimate tool of, I find it very therapeutic when I'm interviewing somebody, right? Because I get to really just like dive in and listen. And I know that I'm providing that value by helping you feel heard and helping you feel seen. And that builds these like true connections. So I think anybody that has figured that out and shows up like this, I'm all in, right? Like I'm immediately a fan of you, Pete, right? Like I want to help in any way that I can. And I love that you're allowing me to have this conversation.
Well, thanks, dude. I appreciate it. Well, I think, from here, like, how have you been able to do, all your skill set and everything else and transform that into real estate and JWB real estate capital and all that other stuff. So talk about that.
Yeah, I'd love to.
And where you're at today.
Yeah, man. When I ended that purposeful pause and I was like, I want to sell community creation as business development, right? Like that was, I literally took a 3-month purposeful pause, beginning of the year. And then it was like April. And I'm like, all right, now I got to make some money, bro. Started just spinning my wheels around. And my first couple clients were authors, right? We're like best-selling authors and this and that. And by the end of the year, I had met the guys at JWB and I knew that they wanted to make content, right? Like I didn't realize how much of a remarkable company they were, right? But they're like, been on the front page of the Wall Street Journal a couple of times, win Best Place to Work awards every single year, invented this like build to rent asset class of investing. And when I met them, I'm just like, guys, have you ever thought about this idea of promoting yourself through the people that you've served, right? Like, how do you become anybody that's an investor is thinking, is this interesting to me? Do I trust this dude? And is it for me? Right. So like, if we can like talk about interesting things often enough, then people will show up and start to trust you. And if you're showing them other people like them, then they'll figure out that, oh, this is for me too. Right. Yeah. And just with that concept, they took a flyer on it and they became my first like big client. And I'm the host of their show. And what it's done for me, man, like we started this show in like January 2020 and I've gotten to do a twice a week live internet talk show with Greg Cohen, who's the co-founder of JWB, interviewing all these folks that they've helped and real estate experts and all this stuff. And it's opened up my eyes to, at a macro level, the power of long-term thinking, right? Like the way that they operate, what their product represents, and how it all succeeds has been this exercise in long-term thinking that I can't unsee. Right. And then at a micro level, it's made me really understand the dynamics of like the power of smart debt in an asset that appreciates over time while cash flowing in the short run, and understanding what it takes to have that operate while you don't have to do it. Right. So this idea of workforce housing inside of Jacksonville, Florida, that has all the tailwinds in the world of like where the world is going. Right. It's like coastal, good weather, southern, lower than average median income. Urban core hasn't even come online yet, and it's already like an awesome place. Like I think it's Orange County 40 years ago, man. After telling you I lived in Orange County, so I see that that's happening. I saw what happened in Miami during the when Miami downtown came online, which really only happened in the last like 15 years, and what's happened there, and then understanding that these like rental properties have these like 5 profit centers, right? They have the cash flow piece, they have the debt pay down piece, they have the tax savings, the hedging against inflation, and then appreciation. And understanding that, are you an NFL fan?
Oh yeah. Yeah. The Packers.
The Packers. Got it. Right. So like, I think of it, like I think about quarterback arm strength, right? Like I'm a Gator fan. We've had plenty of good quarterbacks that didn't make it in the NFL because they weren't strong enough throwers. But then you also look at a guy like Jamarcus Russell, who can throw a football through a garage door, and that guy flamed out of the NFL real quick, right? So like I see cash flow as quarterback arm strength. You have to be able to make the throw. Like you have to have a certain amount to get into the league. And then once you're there, once you're at this positive cash flow thing, then everything else you want is based on like the upside of how much it can appreciate over time. If you're a young person like myself, right? Like if you're looking in a 25-year cycle. So really understanding that, and really not, most people fall in love with just the cash flow component, but really understanding that if you're in it for the long haul, that if you look at it 25 years later, the appreciation is like the entire Pac-Man, and then the other things are the mouth of the Pac-Man. And then understanding that the number one thing that matters at that point is to find a market where those dynamics are in play, and to find an operator that is going to manage that thing in the right way that aligns incentives with what you're doing because they're buying in the same place and they have a certain scale. That piece of it really changed my life because I came from this like expensive market. Like you're in Southern California, right? I was in Miami, like where $500,000 buys you like a shoebox, right? And like understanding that you can put a $200,000 4-bedroom house under contract that you only have to put 20% down on, and the dynamics of how that money starts to compound over time, because when you leverage it, you're only putting 20% down, but you're getting the payback on the appreciation of the other 80% plus your 20%. Like there's just no other asset class that can do that. I can't go, like it'd be insane to go get a loan to buy stock because it's so volatile, but you can get a loan to go buy a home that's going to appreciate on the entire value of the loan while somebody else is paying down the loan. And in the short term, you're making a $50, $100, $200 per house. It just becomes insanely scalable if you can come up with the chunks of down payment that you need to put it in. So like that little piece of financial education has completely opened up my mind to like, what else don't I know? Right?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and two, it's, a lot of people will just, they'll be like, yeah, real estate's too expensive. I'll just buy a primary. But if you look at, for one, the stats on the net worth of people that own a home versus rent, I think I just read it. They just updated it, but it's like 360,000 of net worth versus, that own the home once they retire versus the person that rents, it's like $5,200. Yeah. So that being said, granted, that could be someone that rents their primary and has like 50, rental properties, or, has their primary too, and then all that. But that being said, that's massive because, that's building wealth. And then at the end of the day, you can leverage that. But if you talk about that and you talk about, okay, well, maybe this person has 2 to 3 rental properties and they just pay them down over that 30-year block, don't refinance it. Then when they're finished, they're getting, let's just say average rent's $1,500. They're getting $3,000, a month.
$1,500 today, that rent's going to go up over time, right?
Yes, exactly. Today. Yeah. And the rent's going to be, by the time, let's just say they start renting it out, by the time they retire, the rent's going to be $3,000 or, a home. So it's powerful and it's huge. And people don't think about that because they think about the now versus the later. And then, you get a spike when they're, 50-ish and they're like, okay, well, I gotta get, something going. Right. So speak to me on that. Like you've kind of, you've put yourself into a position where you started buying rentals and everything else. What does that look like? And do you have a game plan for that going forward for you?
Yeah, man. This thing that you just described of not what the cash flow looks like today, but what the cash flow looks like in 30 years is what I really think about, right? Like my dad, I was just telling you this earlier, right? My dad's been an international successful businessman and entrepreneur, and he's now 76. He's hit a couple home runs in his life. He's doing well. And over the last 6 months, I've seen him be like, yeah, no, next month I'm not going to go take that trip because the stock market is just kicking my ass. Right. Yeah. And I'm like, that sucks. Right. Like we think about this idea. You remember that? I think it was an ING commercial. It was like somebody walking around with a number.
Oh I remember.
That. People have this idea that if I save up $3 million, by the time I'm 70, then I can live off that stuff. But what's happening right now is that we're living much longer in our retirement years. For sure. So the idea that at some point you're going to hit an economic downturn while you're retired, and if your money's in the market, then you have all the stuff that you saved for a long time, and then you're forced to be super conservative with that, and you're supposed to just take whatever it tells you, and your fixed income is liable to go up and down based on the tweet of Elon Musk. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when you contrast that with what you just described, you contrast that with, man, if I can get to 10 rental properties and they're paid down by the time that I'm 30, and the average rent is $2,500, then I've got $25,000 every single month coming into my pocket, and the swing is, every once in a while, one of those is going to be unoccupied, right? Yeah. And so it goes from $2,500 to $22,500, not $17,000 to $12,000 to $13,000 to $6,000. like, and at the end of the day, that's what I'm seeking, man. I see this idea of just like stacking chips and stacking chips and stacking chips that eventually are going to be able to give me that cash flow. And I see that within the next like 5 or 6 years, these homes that I've purchased, because Jacksonville is one of the fastest growing metro areas in the country, and like appreciation is going bananas, and it's all cash flow positive right now. In like 5 or 6 years, I'm going to be able to refinance it, take equity out of that, and go buy 3 more. Right. So it's kind of like the rabbit that keeps on having more babies, and like you're getting paid per baby kind of thing. I don't know how to that's a terrible description, but yeah. So that's the plan, right? Like my plan is like, I got to 3 because at 3, I'm diversified, right? Like when one home is unoccupied, the other 2 are paying for themselves, and the cash flow that I get from the other 2, I'm able to put into that, and that mitigates my monthly expense. Yeah. But my plan is to buy them in chunks, get to about 10, and then at that point, that's what I want in my real estate bucket. After that, then all the rest of the stuff that I'm investing in is a little bit more active. It's a little bit more market centric. I very much believe in the idea that, have you ever read this book called The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb?
No, I've heard of it. A couple of people have mentioned it. Patrick David, I kind of follow him. He's mentioned it. So tell me about that.
Yeah, listen, the book's cool. The book has this like one profound concept, and it just beats it to death. Yeah. But I believe the concept, right? Yeah. And there's a couple of other things in there that I really believe in, right? But like a black swan event is something that happens that you could not have seen coming, that changes the trajectory of the world or your life as it is forever. And if you look in hindsight, you could have rationalized it, but you couldn't have seen it coming at the time, right? So like there's good black swans and bad black swans. 9/11, COVID, bad black swans. Yeah. The invention of penicillin, the invention of the Model T, the internet, good black swans, right? Yeah. So this guy Nassim Taleb says that if you base an investment strategy on like putting 80 to 85% of your stuff in like really safe, reliable things, and then 10 to 15% of your stuff in exposure to positive black swans, tech, life sciences, right? Like that type of stuff, then you have this like really well-balanced like stability plus chance to hit walk-off home runs. Yeah. And that's where I'm headed, man. That's the portfolio that I want to build. I want my real estate portfolio to be that really stable base. And then I want to use the other 15 to 20% to just take bets. And as a guy that I love business, man, I love analyzing businesses. I really want to gamble with it. Like I really want to bet on this idea of just like, man, I really believe in this sector. I really believe in this thing. I like the marketing. I like the flywheel that they're creating, and just go for it. Yeah. So that's my vision.
So speaking of business and stuff like that, outside of real estate, what do you get into? Like what type of businesses are you getting into?
So this book I have right here, Play Bigger, is the #1 book that has like changed my life, right? So it's the concept of category design. Have you ever heard of the term category king?
No.
So like when you're a category king, you become synonymous with the problem that you solve, right? So when I say ride sharing, you think of one company. When I say tablet, you think of one kind of tablet, right? Yeah. Because Steve Jobs was a continuous category designer because he did that across multiple things. Yeah. And these guys at Play Bigger, they wrote this book about this concept, and they studied the S&P 500, and they realized that out of the S&P 500, there was like 40 companies or something. Don't quote me on the numbers, right? But like a small segment of companies that were pursuing a category design strategy, and the ones that succeeded were actually responsible for like 70% of the overall growth of the S&P 500, right? So then they delineated what that formula is. And what happens is that if you do this correctly, if you design a category correctly, you end up with 76% of the market share of the category, right? So that's why Tesla is worth more than every other car company put together. It's because they are 76% of the electric powered vehicle category, not because they are being valued as one part of the automotive industry. Yeah. So I'm like obsessive about this category design thing. It's a whole business methodology that I'm really working hard at implementing in my own business, but I'm out there looking for, like, I got the, like, What's the term for when you identify the things that you're like looking for? The reticular activator.
Yeah, reticular
Right.
activator
I got the
systems.
reticular activator going because, some of the tenets are you're evangelizing a problem, not a brand. Right. And like, if you can define the problem the best, then you're known to have the solution. And then if you're doing that, then the way that you do it is through these like lightning strikes, and you have to design a business model and a product and a category that all fits in this like magic triangle. So I'm always looking for those companies, and I've hit on some, man. Like I bought Shopify. I bought Shopify like 6-7 years ago. That's really hit for me. I bought Peloton like a little bit before the pandemic and sold it right after the pandemic. That bought me a house. So I'm out there really studying that discipline and going hard at that. And those are the companies that I'm investing in, right?
Yeah. So what's your reliability on data when you're researching the company? Or is it, for you, because I know maybe it's a little bit of a feeling on the company, but a lot of it's, you got to do it data, just like a home, right?
Yeah, it's data, man. I learn through people, right? Okay. I know everything I know from like networking and podcasts.
Yeah. Sure.
So I the godfather of category designs, this guy, Christopher Lochhead, I've like wormed my way into that world. Like I'm about to like have coffee with this dude in like a week because I've figured out how to get there.
Yeah.
And so I literally pal around with all like I don't pal around. I virtually stalk and have on my podcast and like add as much value as possible and whenever I can, and read everything from like the foremost thought leaders of this. And when I see them getting involved in companies, I'm like, I'm in.
You're on,
and then I'm also just looking for certain signals, man. I very much believe that if, I'm looking for that signal of evangelizing a problem. I'm also looking for the signal of, are you reducing friction from something that people actually want, right? Like, and I'm also looking for that. I'm a community guy, right? I'm also looking for that. Are the people that buy it out there convincing 3 or 4 of their friends to also get it? That's what got me on Peloton. I was like, everybody with a Peloton won't shut up about a Peloton. Right.
Yeah.
So
I gotta dive in.
Chipotle, Shopify, right? Like that e-commerce wave, like all that stuff. So I'm looking for companies that are evangelizing a problem and solving it differently, building community around it, and really going for that word of mouth led growth in a sector that is clearly ripe for something new, right? And that's what I'm looking for, man. Like my latest bet is Rivian, right? Have you heard of Rivian?
Yeah. They're based in Irvine. I live in Irvine. So they're based in Irvine. Yeah.
So there, if you look at what they're talking about, they're talking about, like, if you go to their webpage, the whole point of view of theirs is like, you need better attachment to the outdoors. And if you're going to be attached to the outdoors, you need something that's going to get you there. And if you need something that's going to get you there, it's got to be eco-friendly. And that's why we're doing this, electric adventure vehicle category.
For sure.
Right. They don't talk about the car. Like they're talking about this like point of view and this problem that exists. So I get that they've only shipped like 5 cars and they're worth 10 million per car that they've actually sold, but I see what they're doing, man. Like it's the Amazon playbook. It's the same thing. So I make small bets across those.
Yeah, I just had a buddy reserve one for, I don't think he's going to get it for like another year or so, but he just reserved one, and he's like, and it took me a second to remember what it was, because he was like, I got the Rivian, and I was like, what is that? And then I remembered it's a truck, because I still see him. I see him locally, so I see him drive around and stuff. But I think that kind of goes back to business, right? It's if you are, and also goes back to the core of what we talked about when we jumped on the podcast, is it's the flow of how like the business is structured towards the goal versus like, hey, we're just going to sell the widget and get X amount of money.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, okay, well, you can only do that so far. You can only do that to, maybe $1 million, $50 million. But then if you want to go to, 100 million to 5 to $1 billion, that's really what ultimately pushes you, right? Is the drive and the passion and the culture behind whatever you're going after.
That's why the Packers have the smallest budget and yet crush, right? Like I'm a Dolphins fan. Like that team is run like shit. Like you can't, nobody knows what they're up to, right? Like I get it. Like I can't unsee that stuff anymore. Yes, I'm obsessed with the business strategy behind it, which by the way is the number one thing that got me into investing in real estate in real estate, right? Because like working in the belly of the beast of JWB to tell that story, I started looking around like when they went to onboard, like I'm a marketing vendor to them. And Greg's like, dude, come to our Tuesday morning meeting. I want you to see it before we can talk about this. I'm like, great, dude. I can't wait to go to your all hands meeting. I'd rather get punched in the face. But I get there and it's like the whole, like at that point, there were like 80 people. And it's like the entire company locked in on each other. They start off with this like core values call out where people get up and compliment a coworker of theirs based on living their core values. And I'm like, wow, this is different. Like, and I'm like, by the end of the hour, I'm like, I want to come to all these meetings. Right.
Yeah. You're like, I'm in.
Like, let me get a job
Pablo,
here.
You don't work here.
Yeah. It's like walking in and out, man. You never have like, everybody's pumped, like
for sure.
So like, that experience, right? Like seeing how they operate in the long-term thinking of it all and how they drive so deeply at culture and a data flywheel, which they use to make all decisions and all these different things was what made me like, that's the first thing that I was like, oh, okay, you know what? I'm not just going to host this thing. I'm actually going to learn about this asset class and I'm in. And from that lens is what's allowed me to get educated on it. And I look for it everywhere now. Just like I look for it in a stock, I look for it in if I'm going to get in on a syndication or something like that. I'm looking at that operator, man. I'm looking at like, do you have these qualities where you are doing something differentiated that's not commoditized, where you are focused on an experience from team out that builds a community and you're adding to that piece of the pie that's greater than yourself. And how well do you communicate it?
Yeah, for sure. No, 100%. I think that's what makes or breaks an entrepreneur, and especially like how big they get. Cause someone's capacity is going to be at, 50 mil but if they bring that culture with them, it's going to be exponential versus, someone's capacity could be less, but they bring that culture with them and, it's going to get even bigger. So yeah, I think that. I think you got to kind of look at I think the term of this podcast is reverse engineer it. And like, it's been a term for a long time. I know Gary V's like pushes it, pretty hard, but yeah, it's like, you really you gotta know what your goal is and you got to work back from there to be able to be successful and push, wherever you're going to go. And that kind of leads to passion, kind of leads to grit and all those other things that go into it. What, like for you, if you're looking, 2 to 5 years down the road, what does it kind of look for you?
Man, I'm really hot on this like business model that is create a service that you like, create your own methodology, check, right? Like that you can execute for people and show success. Then once you have enough people that you're showing success to that, teach that methodology via like online cohort-based classes that you can then like now get more people bought in on it, having success for them at a cheaper rate and then really drive hard at community from that, right? Like between the people that you're doing it for and the people that are learning it and implementing themselves, right? Like go immediately into events, right? Like the online cohort thing has really high gross profit, right? So take that cash, invest it into the people getting to know each other, and then invest the other piece of it into a software that allows you to do the service, right? Proprietary software that allows you in your unique, differentiated way, and build that out to the point where you can release it after it's built. You've done the like proven methodology, you've done the evangelism, you've created the events community, and then all of a sudden you have this way that now everybody can do it and you release it to them. Like that to me is the business model that I'm chasing, man. So for me, it's that, right? Like I'm at the point where like I have the service side down. We've started teaching this thing. Events is next, right? Like I have like my little community that I'm building. Events is next. And then once that teaching and events piece gets profitable enough, start creating this like software product that's going to make this, it's going to be like the ultimate like relationship building software tool that allows you to repurpose content in a way that you use it to leverage relationships. and then release that thing. So for me, in 5 years for my business, that in the meantime, that's my upside bet, right? That's my
Yeah.
category design bet on myself, which is most of my active time. Beyond that, man, I'm literally just taking chunks. I'm taking like 50 grand chunks of profitability and putting them into these rental properties to just build this army of rental properties in a market that I trust with an operator that I believe in, so that if I'm wrong about all that other stuff, I'm still good, man. So, you said 5 years. In 5 years, I think that I will be at the point where I've at least developed the software for myself and it's starting to get tested. And I think that I will be at, I'll likely have 6 to 7 rental properties. Right now, I've got 3.
Okay. Nice.
What about you, man? Where are you going to be in 5 years, dude? That's a great question.
Oh, where am I going to be? Okay. So let's see. Dude, kind of now you're interviewing me. So I run the team in Southern California, like I explained before you jumped on. We have, let's see, one agent. We kind of transitioned. So we have one agent, another assistant that's going to get his license. So I have 2 assistants right now. I need to pull in an operation manager to kind of help the back end, because right now I'm doing it all. To be able to really coordinate certain things that I'm currently coordinating and doing some sales. So that will help the hub of, the core of really the operation. And then I can separate myself, go do more sales to bring it in and really help the business excel on a different level. And I have been a little worried about that for a while, just because the cost and everything else, but it really will help. You kind of have you heard about what is it? Decision fatigue.
Yes.
So I get that a lot, especially because I'm helping a lot of people out and everything else through the sales. So it gets to the point where I get bogged down, and then I put a lot into operations, and then I got to go sell, then I got to go put into operations. So back and forth. So long story short, building that out, ops manager in the next couple of months, and then add more agents in other areas that I can't get to. And looking at, we do about 50 transactions right now. We're trying to push to 75 at the end of the year, and then expand that into about 150 to 200 in the next couple of years. But going back to the culture, I don't want to expand too quick and lose the culture or lose the drive of kind of what we're looking at. And then real estate wise, on buying investments, because I do that on the side. So that's my active, the side stuff. I buy all single families in my backyard. So like Redlands, where I grew up. So
do you manage them?
I do now. Yeah. So I do now, but once I get to a place, the next probably 3 to 4 that we end up picking up, I'm gonna bring in a manager. I got an eye on one that I've been referred to, and I've been kind of, having conversations with, but I'll most likely bring in him and his company and have him manage them moving forward. So, and then, the next 5 years on rentals, I want to have 50,
Let's go.
Single families. So especially in Southern California, I mean, I know a lot of people are worried about Southern California, just rent wise, and that grasp that California has done to landlords. But I think that, guys that are billionaires that are right down the street from me are still doing very, very successful, and they're not selling their whole portfolio and moving out of state. They're just adjusting. I still feel very comfortable in California as we speak. So
people still want to live in paradise, bro. Southern California is a wonderful place to live, man.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not too bad in Florida either. So I will say that. So, but yeah, that's how it looks.
That's cool, man. So you're building a significant real estate portfolio, and then it sounds like your active business is you're going for this. It's a brokerage.
Yeah.
So you're going for kind of spreading brokerage into maybe other markets is kind of like where you're going with a deep cultural kind of understanding and the right people.
Yeah. So just growing the team where, because we have we have people that come in to buy and sell 2 hours away. So I want to be able to make sure that we can service those people, because if I'm in the car, 4 or 5 hours just to see, one home, it's not, it's not there.
Cool.
So yeah, that's what it looks like, man. A lot of stuff to put down on paper and then actually execute.
I love it. I love
Yeah,
it,
man.
man. Yeah.
Well, a couple of things, dude, before we get you out of here, Pablo. I know we're running up on time here, but so for you, any good books? I know you have a few in the back, and you mentioned Play It Big.
Yeah.
So,
Play
or Play
bigger. Play
Bigger.
bigger. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, what's a good book?
I mean, Play Bigger is literally the only book that I've ever read twice in under a year.
Okay.
So I highly, highly recommend that one. Good books for what? Good books for real estate. Good books for
Let's
like
say
what?
let's say for business.
Yeah, man. So have you ever heard of the Ultimate Sales Machine?
I have. I
You
think
ever
I've
heard of the
read it.
concept of the Dream 100?
No.
So that's one of these like concepts that people that came from this book. So the Ultimate Sales Machine was this book that was written by Chet Holmes, who's like the
That's right.
Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, right? And like Charlie Munger's like Warren Buffett's right hand guy. Chet Holmes was Charlie Munger's right hand guy. Wrote this book. It's like they call it like the Red Business Bible. And so Chet died like 8 years ago, and his daughter Amanda took over the company. And she was a singer-songwriter, and it became this like hornet's nest of people trying to get the company from her. And eventually she like read her dad's book, implemented it in the company, and now she's grown this company, doubled it year over year over year based on the methodologies from the book. And now that she's done that, she's releasing the updated edition of the Ultimate Sales Machine like next month based on Chet Holmes's like formulas adapted to like the modern age. And I'm just super freaking pumped for that to come out.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I've heard of it.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna have to check that out.
It's like one of the it's always on those like lists of like top 10 most recommended business books of all time, right? Like I've become friendly with Amanda. Anytime she walks in a room, people are like, oh my god, Ultimate Sales Machine changed my life. So like it's one of those like business Bibles, and
Yeah.
I'm really pumped to see this new edition because I mean I know a little bit of like what's going into it, and I recently took her online cohort class of the state, you know, how you formulate like a core story, which is another big formula in that book, and it's so good. So I'm looking forward to it. So I highly recommend anybody like go to that website and sign up for the new edition of that. It's coming out.
Okay, cool.
But Play Bigger for sure, man. Like if you're gonna, you know, like it'll blow your mind. Like you will never look at business the same way.
Dude, I have this app called Goodreads.
Yeah.
Have you read it? Or I mean, not read it, but do you have it?
I don't use it, but I've heard of it.
Okay, yeah, it's just like I just like save all the books in there that either I have read, because I'm like, I don't want to, you know, screw it up where I read like 5. I mean, I know I'm going to read the same book, but I'll go ahead and like, you know, throw it in there so I have some accountability for myself.
I use my like Audible wish list, right? Like I'm always just like putting stuff on the wish list.
Yeah. No, it's good. Okay, what about an online resource or website that you use to be more efficient in business?
I'm gonna sound like I'm beating a dead horse here, but the guy that wrote Play Bigger, this guy Christopher Lochhead, him and like 2 other big shots in this thing, started a newsletter called Category Pirates.
Okay.
And it's like a $200 a year newsletter. I'm like the first guy. I don't read emails, and this thing shows up, and I know it's gonna be like a 40-minute read, and I'm just like drop everything and I read it. So like that newsletter of Category Pirates, man. It's just like it's all this stuff, but like practically executed day to day, you know. And it's I'm telling you, man, like all I think about is how can I make more friends and how can I like master category design. So
yeah, dude. All right. And then let's see, for you, where can people find out about you?
You know, man, I really want to send people to, since this is a real estate podcast. I would love for people to go to jwbmakeseateasy.com because I host their show. Like if you get into the JWB web, like I'm like their mascot, right? So I would love for people to go to jwbmakeseateasy.com and that way they can see the whole like real estate investing stuff, since that's what your audience is really, really into. And you're not going to be able to miss me, man. I am like the Mickey Mouse of JWB. So.
Okay. All right. Cool. Okay, cool, man. Was there anything that throughout this podcast I missed asking you?
Dude, I love that question. That's such a good question. So that's something I ask in podcast.
Oh, okay.
I don't think you missed asking it, man, but I really do. I really believe in the idea, and we kind of talked about this, right? Like, I really believe in the idea that it is much more powerful to be a kingmaker than to be a king. Right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're trying to be king, everybody that wants to be king is out to kill you. If you're a kingmaker, everybody that wants to be king wants to be your friend.
Yeah. For sure.
So that's really like the number one thing that I tell people is like, in whatever you're doing, how can you be a kingmaker instead of a king, right? Like, if you're a boss, like, think about how your employees can get their dream job after working for you, instead of how can you like keep this person tied down, right? Because the one person that gets to their goals under your guys will get you everybody else that wants to get there, and most of them are going to stay, right?
Yeah.
Like, lean in on that. If you're at a networking event, man, it's like, how can I introduce you to someone in this room instead of like, how can you buy my crap, right? Like, think from a kingmaker mentality, and you're gonna do well. That is really great long-term thinking. Don't try to be the star of the stage. Be the stage yourself.
Yeah, man. I agree with that. I've never heard that, dude, and I think that's a solid way to sum up the conversation that we've had today, and then also in the podcast, because being able to champion the people below you or beside you or above you or wherever those people are, just like talking full circle of having conversations with people, building them up is really where it should be at.
That's what's up, man. And listen, on that note, if you are listening to this show and you've been listening to Peter, like, go put a review on this podcast, man. Like, podcasters, podcasters put a lot of love on this. So, friend that we've been hanging out in your ear right now, like, if you haven't given him a review, if you don't like share this thing, just do him a favor, man. Like, how many hours a week do you put into this thing, man?
A good amount. I mean, I would say probably 5 to 10 of like, not just interviews, making sure that the description's good, make sure the production's good and stuff like that.
Yeah. So hook up your boy. If you got any value out of this, hook up your boy Peter, man. Thanks, man. Send it to somebody. Put a review out there, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, dude. Well, Pablo, thanks so much, dude. I appreciate your time today and your candor, especially going through this. I appreciate it.
Dude, this was awesome, man. I want to be friends. Let's be friends.
Yeah, let's be friends for sure. All right, man. Have a good day, dude.
See ya.